Jack, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate you talking to us. Look, back to school looks like a moving target. None of us can figure out what's going to happen. What are you expecting?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is a mix of remote learning as well as in-person learning. And, education leaders are trying to balance safety needs of students and teachers and the families they return to every day, along with the fact that the remote learning experiment of the spring wasn't that successful. We had significant learning loss. There was issues with social development, with kids not being in a social gathering that is the classroom. So we're trying to balance the two, and education leaders are faced with a difficult decision to start remotely and then perhaps go back to in-person or vice versa.
So what does that mean then for textbooks, for example? Like, do you have to transfer them all more digital? And does that sort of happen more quickly than you had assumed originally, potentially?
Yeah, all of our instructional materials are made available in digital form as well as analog. So what's interesting is before the pandemic, when in March all the schools closed, we had a ratio of about 2-to-1, that is students to computers. And what happened when the schools closed is millions of students went home, especially in high need areas, with no computers and no access to the internet. And then the ensuing months, school districts have been purchasing iPads and Chromebooks to ensure that kids have that essential learning device, that is the computer and internet connectivity. And so that has really been the limiting factor to all digital access, and that's that ratio of students to devices. And we think we'll get closer to 1-to-1 post-pandemic.
Jack, have teachers made the transition? That's got to be one of the key aspects to all of this, many of which will have taught using hard copy for years and years. Many obviously have no experience of dealing with students or anything else in the virtual world. How big a challenge has it been to retrain teachers for this new environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the pandemic was a forcing mechanism for teachers who were holding virtual classrooms using video conferencing technology. And we just completed an educator confidence survey, and we found that 8 out of 10 teachers feel very confident in their use of education technology. I'm not so certain that would have been the case a year ago, but as a result of that forcing mechanism, teachers are really embracing education technology.
What happens if you're dealing with a population or student body that just doesn't have either the devices or good Wi-Fi or even good access to the internet? How do you reach those kids?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we still have printed materials, so that those kids who don't have access to a computer or access to the internet do have printed materials they can fall back on. That said, I think that's changing very rapidly. I think more and more students are going back to school with a computer and with access to the internet, because everyone realizes after that big shame on us moment back in March that computing technology is essential to teaching and learning.
Will good come out of this? Will this accelerate positive trends within education?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, certainly with our company and K-12 education as a whole, is an acceleration in the use of digital technologies. And when you think about the difference between using printed materials and using digital technologies, a core instruction book does not interoperate well with an intervention book. But an application for core instruction interoperates incredibly well with an application for supplemental or intervention instruction. And you have the opportunity to really use artificial intelligence to extend the teacher, to personalize learning. I'll give you one example. We have an intelligent reading assistant called Amira that works with kids much in the same way that teachers would work with them, to help them sound out words and essentially learn how to read and become proficient readers. And then after every session, it sends a diagnostic report back to the teacher. That's not possible in the analog world. It is possible in a digital world. So you're going to see greater and greater personalization, greater and greater infusion of artificial intelligence into the classroom. And as a result, the opportunity to advance learning for each and every student.
Well, that's interesting. I'm thinking of like a robot teaching my 6-year-old. I also wonder, Guy and I spoke to the CEO of Avenues here in New York. Well, they're all around the world, but and they have basically two programs, right? They have their in-person learning, which is like $45,000 a year, and then they have remote learning too, which is $30,000. They were already on that bandwagon. I wonder if you're noticing other schools doing the same thing, like they're going to have legit two schools, online and in person.
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing more and more parents and educators allow for that virtual learning option, as well as a homeschooling option, as well as your traditional classroom, which may be in person or virtual. That's clearly the case. One of the things that we wanted to do with HMH Anywhere, a solution we announced a couple of weeks ago, was allow educators to do instruction remotely or in person or in hybrid form, and have that change over the course of the year, because things are very uncertain right now, but have one platform they can go to, whether instruction is happening virtually or in person or in a hybrid mode.
Jack, as the education world goes digital, it's likely to be exposed to more competition from the tech giants. Do you see this accelerated shift changing your competitive landscape?
Yeah, I think the tech giants have been in K-12 education. One example, obviously, is Apple with their iPads. Another example is Google with not only their applications, but now Google Meet, the video conferencing facility, as well as Google Classroom, which is a learning management system. So we see more and more interest on the part of bigger technology players in K-12 education, because the K-12 education and education in general is the second largest industry, second only to healthcare. And as we see these companies continue to grow and look for growth opportunities, we think they're going to look to education.